manifestation, both of which are being pursued actively by the military as one of the major areas of research in the 21st century. And this research didn't start in the 21st century. It goes back several decades. We track the evolution of the technology with over 100 source documents cited in our material that carries that simple evolution from the mind control of the Korean War to the kinds of controlled effects that the military is looking for in 2004 and beyond. The thing about all of this, when you think about these technologies and the invasiveness of these technologies, lots of people start to raise concerns. One of the other really important areas, probably one of the most important areas, is the issue of privacy in a technological age. Things have changed dramatically since I was a kid. Growing up in Alaska, things were pretty primitive in the late 50s and early 60s here. Today, we have the most modern communications technology, some of the newest communications technology, and at the same time, our technology offers great challenges, great opportunities, but at the same time it offers some things that we do need to be very concerned about. Data collection, or data valence as the Europeans call it these days, is the idea of analyzing information to profile individuals. And how does this work? And who is responsible for all of this? And how did all of this evolve? We got to go back to World War II, actually. And right after World War II, the United States, Great Britain, New Zealand, Australia, and Canada entered into an arrangement that became what is now known as Echelon. What this arrangement was within the United States, we couldn't just survey our whole population, and end up engaging in surveillance over everyone. Back in those days, the way it was worked out is we set up arrangements where the Canadians and the British would look at our communications, we'd look at their communications, and we all exchanged the data. In other words, instead of us violating the civil liberties of our own citizens, we violate the civil liberties of somebody else's citizens and then just pass the information on. This became Echelon, and if you look it up on the web or anywhere else, you'll see New York Times articles, Washington Post articles, lots of exposés about this particular project. Because what it evolved into from the early days of signal intelligence, analyzing communications, to full surveillance. What it amounts to is all of communications that's electronically based, whether it's telephone, telegraph, fax machines, internet, are all monitored. And what they utilize are supercomputers run by the NSA and others that are capable of sorting tremendous volumes of data. When you look at the NSA, one of the really excellent exposés, Body of Secrets by James Bamford, actually talks about the capability. You know that on a square inch of medium, on storage medium, you can now store as much as 1 million pages of data with the most sophisticated systems. 1 million pages for a few pennies can be stored on any individual. But here's where it goes. That becomes pretty interesting. This is where it's headed in terms of data collection, and this will make a lot more sense as we go through this section. And I quote, "We have made a big step by showing the possibility of integrating quantum gates and using solid-state devices. It takes 1 trillion years to factorize a 200-digit number with present supercomputers, but it would take only 1 hour or less with a quantum computer." In other words, moving from sorting data that takes 1 trillion years with today's technology to an hour to sort the same amount of information. That's the key to surveillance technologies in the 21st century. This book was written 4 years ago. We're already approaching advances that will leap to that level within our lifetime, within the next couple of years. What will that entail? What will that mean? Think about the data that's collected on individuals. That's now being collected in what are called data warehouses, where the information is collected for analysis. Under the new rules of this country, in terms of homeland security, that data is going to be sifted and sorted by government officials from who knows how many different branches of the government to profile individuals. What does it include? Every public record. Think about your passport, your driver's license, your land records, all of those things that are public or that the government actually already controls. Take that and then look at what about your credit card transactions or your financial transactions that are all stored on digital medium. Look at your telecommunications, your internet traffic. All of those things that leave a trail that can be tracked will be tracked because it's cheap. If you can store a lot of data, and that's been the biggest issue, is getting enough information, storing enough information cheaply enough to matter, to where larger and larger segments of the population can be looked at instead of very few and narrow targets. So what is done is each of 300 participating agencies within the 5 governments under echelon contribute to what are called dictionaries. Now, dictionaries, when we think about them, we think about words. They're words, they're phrases, also voice prints. You know, your voice is as unique as your thumbprint. 5 to 20 seconds of a voice can be picked out of the ether of communications. You know, all those millions of communications, you can pick that out with a supercomputer and actually isolate where a person is, where they're making a call from, where they're communicating from by just analyzing voice. So what happens, the supercomputers sort out the data, looking for those key phrases, terrorists, bomb, you know, looking at voice prints or other information that's useful for them to isolate individuals. And then they look at that data as computers, analyzing it down to the point where they say, these are the real threats, these are the real problems. And with those, then, technicians are alerted that then analyze the data and start looking at that individual more closely. When you consider the amount of information from medical records to all of it, it's tremendous. DNA banks, as a part of that, is becoming more and more useful in Europe, where you're seeing whole communities asked to give up their DNA in order to isolate and eliminate suspects from criminal cases. When you think of surveillance, you have to go way beyond the electronic communications, and something most people don't consider is the cell phone itself. You know that all cell phones now are required to have built into them GPS. This is a geographic positioning system, so you can locate where the person is when they make the call. Now, what is that useful for? They say it's for emergencies, so that if you discharge your phone and you're in an emergency situation, so they can find you. It's for your own protection, for your own safety. Let me tell you how it's been used in Switzerland, used in criminal investigations. They actually, a number of years ago, back in the late 90s, were storing that data. So they actually, on cell phones, stored who called and where you called, that basic information you see on your bill. What they didn't tell you is they were also storing at that time for 6 months where you were when you made the call, because they can figure that out using the antenna grid that actually facilitates cell phone communication, and using the built-in GPS systems. Even when you're not actively talking on the phone, the GPS can be used. Now, with cheaper and cheaper storage capability, you can keep that data longer and longer periods of time. So when you eventually catch up with a criminal, you can then go backwards and track virtually all of their movements through their electronic interactions. This is why the first thing Osama bin Laden did is dump the cell phones, dump the radios, dump all communications that could be monitored. And the way they caught many of these guys in the early days was by tracking those signals. When you think about GPS as one component, another major issue that people are just starting to talk about, it's shown up in Technology Review, which is MIT's technology journal, an excellent journal for looking at trends and directions of technology. One of the big issues that they came out with was implantable technology. They actually developed a medical implant that could be ingested in the body. It's the size of the first digit on an American dime, a 10-cent piece. You're talking about a millimeter, perhaps a millimeter and a half in diameter. This medical device can be used for very complex information, in terms of monitoring an individual. How would this be used, and how might it be used? The idea of implantable technologies, people have looked at that and go, no, we don't want any part of that. That's not anything that we want to see in the United States. In fact, the military looked at that. The U.S. Army War College, in this document, The Revolution of Military Affairs and Conflicts Short of War, actually explored this concept in the late 1980s. The idea of implant technologies, the idea of being able to create what are called EMP weapons, weapons that create a surge of energy that can knock out, say, the avionics on an aircraft, causing an aircraft to crash. One of the things that this document had laid out was the idea that the American public would never accept, in 1989, technologies that were either implantable for tracking movements, and where they thought these might be useful, and where that document says they might be useful, are for military personnel going into the battlefield. Now, if I were a military person and I were in a battle environment, I might want this implant. Let me tell you why.